cloud. Hello and welcome to another great flow conversation. I'm really looking forward to this one tonight. We're going to be talking about if flow exists, regardless of opinions, what's the first step in learning to see it? So we were just talking about this before, and I'm joined by Steve, Chris, and Adam, and we could get right into it. So where do you want to start? We've decided, we've all agreed that flow does exist in all organizations, albeit it may be very slow in some places, but it does exist. So how do we learn how to see it? Who wants to go first? Tell you what, I'll nominate someone. Go, Adam.
Yeah. So learning to see flow, I think, starts actually with value stream mapping and visualizing it, like learning to see it in your organization, however you define it. And from there, you can, see what's working or what's not. I think the first step is actually visualizing what flow looks like in your organization, getting it out of your head and getting it into a picture that you can communicate to everybody else that you work with.
I think I agree with a caveat. I think everyone would expect me to say that to start with value stream mapping, but I think it's also really valuable for people to really consider what is value, right? If we think of the flow of lean and the steps of lean, the first thing is defining value and then mapping the value stream. And I think the reason for that is having a target, having a defined outcome helps us define the stream, because we could sort of agonize over what are the boundaries of the stream, which stream do we pick, how do we draw the guardrails on that, what does it look like? But when you have the goal, if you understand where the outflow is, you can sort of trace it back through the stream. And so I think it's really important to kind of start with the outcome and then look at the value stream in the context of the outcome, because a lot of folks will, it's safe to assume that we know what the value stream is in a lot of cases. In an SDLC, it's probably the SDLC, and but the boundaries on that SDLC and what is valuable to map, I think, is defined by the outcome as well, because we don't want to map more than we need to in order to accomplish the outcome or deliver the goal deliver the outcome, accomplish the goal.
And I think kind of paired alongside that, there's also at what stage are you in your organization of doing all these things? So if you're a leader seeking to do grand and wonderful things, then starting from your frame, I think is the way to go, understanding what you're trying to actually accomplish. Sometimes you're stuck inside of some very narrow guardrails. And so as you've told me in the past, what's the first thing upstream and the first thing downstream? And then just look at that, the input output of that. And you can at least then get a picture of the handoffs. And that's another, it's a great starting point, not only for visualizing the flow, but for then building the relationships that are like, in fact, part of all that flow. So you can start talking to people about it, sharing it.
I think it is very important to start from where you are, right? It's if you come into an organization, especially if you're coming in from outside, and your immediate step is, well, you're doing it all wrong. It's like, that's totally wrong. Without understanding where the organization is, then anything you say from then on, you've already basically alienated everybody to any suggestion you have. It's like you've got to have some suggestion, some understanding of like, how does flow work now to be able to work out what's the next incremental improvement. It's the appreciative inquiry approach, right? It's the what's working now and how can we make it better, versus how do we find everything that's wrong and fix it? Because we need to be looking at how do we move things forward.
Paired along with that is telling the story of where you've come from to where you've gotten. Because the whole story thing is how you kind of grease the wheels of change. So what would you guys say is as an intro, telling that first story? What's the starting point there?
That's a really interesting aspect of flow, like the flow of evolution, right? Of the value stream, and the story of the value stream itself is a flow from its origins to where it's going. Telling that story, I think, is a big reason why we do outcome mapping. And starting from like pains and goals, you kind of get this this illustration of like where the team is in terms of the things that have been plaguing them for a long time, and then where they want to go and where they were hoping to go, which is usually derailed along the way by circumstances.
Yeah, I think that lines up nicely with that whole, hey, start where we are so we can understand where we are. And we don't spend enough time in organizations doing that, really both appreciating what we've achieved, but understanding as well, where is it we want to go? It's this age-old problem of, we often start with a solution in mind to the problem. And this happens when you come in and start looking at flow, as you end up starting from this idea that, well, we already know how we're going to solve this. We've already got that nailed down. We know exactly the product we're going to buy, the method we're going to use. Like we're going to bring in Agile. We're going to adopt some Atlassian products, and we're going to put all this in, and everything's going to be hunky dory. Not without all of the problems that then come along with that when we suddenly realize that none of these actually address the real underlying problems that we needed to address. So starting from those outcomes and removing a lot of the biases that come with having that solution in mind is definitely the right place to begin, I think.
Speaking about the place to begin, I was just trying to find a quote I read today in the Toyota Way about this. I can't find it. I thought I highlighted it, but I fortunately didn't. But the point was, we have like organizations may jump into something that they think they know how to solve because whatever they want to, but they don't correctly understand the current condition, right? And if you don't understand the current condition, then you won't be able to achieve whatever the outcome is, because you don't understand where the true gap is. And like coming back to like meeting people where they are, meeting where the organization is, like really being clear with what the current state is, like what are the problems, what's going on, before you even start to tackle whatever your goal or outcome is. It's like I myself am guilty of this, but I know that many other organizations are too. It's like resisting that urge to just start because we want to feel productive or we think there's a change that we can make. But when we act like that, we end up doing ourselves a disservice because we create waste, which is the opposite of flow.
The anti-flow. We might have to leave anti-flow for the next session, but we'll see if we can get to it, because I think it's actually really valuable stuff. I was just thinking back onto visualizing flow and providing a counterpoint, because I think, I was reminded of this by what you said about meeting people where they are. There are a lot of organizations that have already made progress in a direction slightly departed from something like lean, right? So if an organization is down the road of something like design thinking or domain-driven design, they might actually be better off visualizing flow using something like Eventstorming, right? Looking at flow in terms of the progress of work across a domain and accumulating in queues, right, as delays, instead of the way that lean does the measurements and the measurements of quality. That could be a way that they feel really comfortable visualizing. And I think that it's good to start there if that's where the energy is and the enthusiasm is, and people are kind of used to thinking in those terms, because it's going to make it easier for people to visualize. And then you can always parlay that into measurement with more rigorous value stream mapping in the future. But I think that's another option for people in terms of visualizing flow.
Is there opportunity also for, as a starting point, looking at how incentivization is done or how performance is measured? and using that as some sort of goalposts or whatever for, I'm trying to come up with the right wording here, but if you're in a very narrow spot and you're not trying to achieve value per se, you're just trying to get the thing from A to B, also considering not just input to output, but also how the rest of the organization is looking at you. And so then if you can say, well, they're looking at me from A, B, and C performance perspectives or expected outputs, we can then tell the story, say, see how we met these performance expectations and then some, because we looked at flow in our situation. Not sure I was going with that. Yeah, what do you think about talking about external influences on telling that story, like looking at the negatives of we don't, or maybe even, and that's like part two, is like the negatives of, look at this story, we went from here to here, and we could have gone further, but we didn't have this. And what if we had that?
So understanding the dependencies that are impacting your ability to deliver are a key aspect of it for sure, and because that helps you informs you about what the current state is and why the current state is the way that it is. So it's often critical to be able to understand, like, why are we making decisions the way we're making it. This is actually a question that I nearly always ask with, especially, and this is an important piece, is that you ask this at every layer, but the higher up the organization you go, the more frequently you're going to ask this, is like, how do you make the decisions that you make? Where does the information come from? What do you use to inform those decisions? Because these are critical pieces, and especially when I'm doing work in the security and risk space, it's like you're asking questions around how do you determine what that risk is? How do you then allow people to be able to make the right decisions and give them the information they need to be correctly informed? How do you ensure that they have that information at their fingertips to be, so that because you can't be everywhere all at once, so how are you ensuring that the right information is being exposed in the right places and things like this?
I think that's really valuable when we think of not necessarily the flow of work, but also the flow of information, because the flow of information is kind of the currency of decisions, right? And as the information flows through the system, it's either enabling decisions or hampering decisions. Sometimes you have information like muddying the waters and making decisions more complicated, especially if you don't have that framework, that decision framework that says, given XYZ, we always decide A, or we tend to lean this way based on principles and values and precedent and all of those things. I think it's really powerful. They're kind of like the lift locks in the flow that either make things work extremely well or keep, big ships from taking that route.
Yeah, it's this interesting aspect of it, is looking at what are all the things I need to bring together to be able to make these decisions? Where do decisions get made, and how are those decisions being made? And then what is the information that's being used to inform those? Because it does tell you a lot about how the organization operates. That's one aspect of it. I mean, Chris mentioned another couple around which are forms of information like financial and incentives, and what drives the organization from a business perspective. Because that'll often, if you start to look at things like, well, how does the business make money? And because that then says, well, that drives certain sets of behavior. Like if you make money by selling a certain number of widgets, selling more widgets makes you more money. So we want to be able to make more widgets to sell more widgets. So like, how do we drive more sales of those things? So that usually drives certain sets of behaviors. But I've been in organizations where there's almost that you end up with these perverse incentives where you're rewarding the wrong set of behaviors, because those behaviors are what on the surface generate value and monetary benefit to the organization, but they're not the right things for the organization in the long term. From a strategic point of view, in order for the organization to survive, they need to pivot. And at that point, it's looking at those incentives and deciding, well, how am I going to make that change? How am I going to convince people in the organization that even though this is what's incenting us to invest here, we need to actually change where we're investing and go in a different direction moving forward.
Do we want to bring it back to so the thing was, if flow exists regardless of our opinions, what's the first step in learning to see it? Have we covered that?
Wandered off a little.
I think visualization methods are one thing, but I think that even just logically mapping the flow of anything, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be visual. Visualization definitely helps with seeing, but I think that as we were talking, and as you were talking, Peter, I was reminded of kind of like the loopy diagrams, right? The systems diagrams where you have outcomes feeding inputs, or outputs feeding inputs, and everything sort of in this cycle. So that's one way of doing it. Again, if we go way back, like the first real flow visualizations that I ever started working on that I kind of got fascinated with were directed acyclical graphs, right? Like the idea that you just have a flow through this kind of logic diagram. And then the other one that was even probably earlier than that was swim lane diagrams. And I think, I've used swim lane diagrams for ages before I realized that they're not providing as much value as something for me, like value stream maps.
I want to also just mention something different than seeing, but also feeling, that if you're working in an organization long enough, maybe you have experienced a point in time where, say, like the team or your department or the entire org felt different. Like the work was just different, the collaboration was different, and that felt better. Like think back to that time and what was different about then, and that might help you understand, or first to be able to sort of intuit or see the things that were different in the organization that actually contribute to flow. Don't forget to draw upon your past experiences if you have them.
It may be helpful as we kind of wrap up here. Maybe we can include in the video description or something a bunch of links and options and ideas. Maybe we can mash on it at the session today, come up with some content for that.
It's a great idea.
Awesome idea. Well, thanks very much, guys. I think we can probably wrap it up there. It was a pleasure as always. I think we went all over the place a little with that one, but hopefully people found value out of all of it and really enjoyed the discussion. So with that, thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Bye.